We are recording the interview of Dorian White. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 12:20 p.m. on the 1st of June, 2018. Dorian, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with where and when were you born?
I was born in Dayton, Ohio, 5/19/1983.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Frederick White. He was a Marine reservist at the time. My mother was a homemaker. Joyce Hooks is her maiden name.
Do you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a sister. My sister, Letitia White, is 5 years older than me. My brother is 4 years older than me, Frederick White Jr.
You mentioned your dad was in the Marine Corps. Do you have any other family members that served in the military?
Yes, his father was a general in the Army. And my maternal grandfather was a engineer in the Korean War.
So you joined the Air Force in what year?
I joined the Air Force August 8th, 2001.
And what were you doing before you joined the Air Force?
I went straight out of high school. So I enlisted actually. I did the early enlistment program while I was a senior in high school.
And what led to that decision?
Just having the military background, not really having direction early in life, not really wanting to get off to a bad start as an adult, and get into debt and college loans and things like that. So I didn't want to waste money on an education that I probably didn't want or or wouldn't benefit from.
So why the Air Force?
It provided me with job training, opportunity to do something greater than myself. Being an African American in the United States is kind of, in order to enhance your social standing within society, you kind of grow up with this idea that you have to be exceptional. And I can't dunk a basketball. I don't run a 4.5 40. I didn't attend a STEM school my entire childhood. So the only thing that seemed like something I can do greater than myself to improve my standing in society was to join the military.
Did you leave right away, or was there time in between?
I spent summer at home. I actually had to go to summer school because I didn't graduate on time. So I graduated right before I left for the military.
What did your parents think about you joining the Air Force?
Well, it was a situation where they were comfortable with it. It's just, I grew up in a household where, and not to say anything bad about my family or how dysfunctional it is, but it's not like middle class families where there's a fund put aside for college. There wasn't a fund waiting for me when I grew up, and that's not a bad thing. I think in some cases it's actually better, because I think that you appreciate it more and you work harder for it. And I think it made me better knowing that I had to work for it, because I wasn't the most studious person my entire life. But,
so tell me about basic training. What was that like?
It was a punch in the mouth, to say the least. Just being taken out of your comfort zone, being put in an environment where you are no longer an individual, and you're kind of, you're tied to these other strangers that you just met, and you have to come together and accomplish a goal, which is, it could be something as minute as folding T-shirts or, graduating basic training. So it was an experience that kind of paved the way for the rest of my 17-year career. I actually was in basic training during September 11th. It actually happened the 5th week of my tenure there. So that kind of changed my whole perspective on my enlistment. Whereas before I was joining the military for personal gain, mostly. And then when 9/11 happened, then I kind of bought into the whole, the patriotic, let's go to war, let's figure out who did this. And it kind of gave me something else to buy into. Yeah.
Do you remember any of your instructors? Did any of them stand out to you?
My military training instructor, Tech Sergeant Chastain, I think that he and the other instructors thought I was kind of arrogant. I don't know what gave that vibe. I don't know anything about my personality that gives that impression on people, but I can just tell that they didn't particularly care for me. There were times where they would tell me not to walk a certain way or march a certain way, or I remember one incident where I know for a fact that I applied all the buttons to my shirt in my wall locker, and then the next day when we have inspections, my stuff is unbuttoned. It's like, and then they take away my base pass for the graduation week. So I just chalked it up to that's just how it is. I don't know. But,
so what was the next move for you after graduation?
My next assignment was my next assignment was tech school for security forces.
What made you want to do security forces?
I came in open general, and they pitched the idea to me when I did my career counseling that I would have more opportunity to go to different bases, and that's kind of what I wanted to do was travel. And then I was also feeling patriotic because of September 11th. So the idea of being a combatant in the military kind of appealed to me. So I put that as my first choice, and lo and behold, I got security forces. I don't regret it. I was glad to get out of that career field, but I'm definitely happy as how it helped develop me as a person.
So you stayed right there in Lackland, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was that tech school like?
That tech school was, compared to other people's tech schools, it was grueling, mainly because of the weather. So I attended tech school during the winter months in San Antonio, Texas, and I know a lot of people may think it's warm and like year round. It's not. In the morning or at the night, in the nighttime, it's freezing cold. And that's when a lot of our training occurred, for the most part, towards the end of tech school, which was the winter months.
Yeah, I was a Master of Arms in the Navy, and our tech school was right across the street from you guys.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So when you finally graduated tech school, what was the feeling like? You finally made it through boot camp, you made it through tech school, and you're about to enter the real Air Force.
Yeah.
Was that a moment of pride for you, or?
It was just being patient. Basic training and tech school, or those two phases in my career, were points that I just wanted to get through. I just wanted to do the job, learn as much as I can, and just be excited about opportunities. My first base was Ramstein. So my first base was Ramstein, Germany. That was December 2001 is when I got there. That experience was, for the most part, good. I had a problem adjusting. I got homesick quite a bit. I did have a girlfriend at the time who was in college at Ohio State, and that caused a lot of stress for me, just being away. And then with my job, one issue that I had was, which I think a lot of military people or young military people have, is they don't know how to cook for themselves. They don't know how to eat properly. They don't know how to get enough rest. They don't know how to exercise. So there were times where I would get really exhausted just being at work. And I just couldn't understand why, but it was probably because I was just eating fast food every day.
Yeah.
And not eating enough food, or not sleeping enough, and not exercising the way that I should. So that caused quite a bit of trouble for me as far as my work performance, and kind of brought down my morale. So when I was at Ramstein, there were times where I excelled and I did really well and I got recognition, and there were other times where I was admonished for certain things.
Did you enjoy the job, at least?
I did. It was a little hard for me because I had a hard time paying attention. I don't know if that's because I was really young, but I had to train myself to listen for keywords when people were talking to me, and try to like decipher what they were saying, because I had no ability to listen to anybody about anything. And then there were times where I would actually, meticulously take notes with a basic conversation, like something you think no one would have to take notes for. I would be taking notes because I knew I wouldn't remember anything, and then I would make myself look, incompetent. So I had to train myself, and eventually I grew out of that. I don't know what that was about, but I think I was worried that I had attention deficit disorder. But as far as enjoying the job, there were times I worked with nuclear weapons. So not ICBMs, but the nuclear weapons that are loaded onto bombers. So there were times where I'd be standing in the middle of a flight line or in the grass, and they would just tell me, look at that tree line for the next 8 hours, and you can't walk more than 2 feet in any direction. You can't sit down, you can't take a knee. It would be raining, snowing. There would be bugs and flies flying all over me, and mosquitoes, and I can't do anything. I have to stand there and hold my weapon and just stare at this tree line for 8 hours.
I think I remember you telling us one time at the squadron about that, and because it was very similar to my job when I was in the Navy. I would be on a ship behind a 50 cal machine gun, and I would just stare at the ocean for 12 hours straight. And the same thing, we couldn't sit down, we couldn't, move more than arm's length from our weapon, and it's just like grueling. That was in the hot sun, and it was just like it was very similar. Experience.
On the oceans, just hot. It's just the humidity. In the air, I think, magnifies the sun, so it just makes it hotter than any other environment. And there's no shade, and it's just...
And your mind probably just wanders.
Your mind wanders. You start thinking about... I think I've gone through, like, entire music albums in my head, or I would go through, like, an entire season of a TV show in my head. And then you start to think, like, I just want to walk off. I just want to go home. Like, I don't even care if I get arrested. I just want to go... anywhere where I can just not do this, because it's painful. But that's what I ended up, being a low-ranking airman, that's what I was subjected to, or that's what I had to basically put in my time. Everyone, for the most part, has to do something like that early in their career. So it was just a matter of putting my time and doing horrible jobs that I feel like weren't related to security forces, but it was definitely things that had to be done. So,
did you do anything for recreation while you were there?
Drinking. There's a lot of drinking. Not that I liked to drink particularly. It was just a part of the culture. It's southwestern Germany, so it's just drinking age was 18 for military. I was 18 years old. There was a lot of nightclubs and partying and things like that. And I wish that I would have traveled more while I was there, because you're essentially located in Europe, and you have the opportunity to drive in any direction and hit a really nice country or vacation spot. But I really spent all my money on just going to nightclubs, which was it got me nothing in the long run. It was just something that young people do.
Did you ever deploy anywhere from there, or?
I did not. I did not deploy from Ramstein. I wouldn't have mind. It just, I think I was too young to really handle a deployment at the time. I was barely able to cope with being in Ramstein or being in Germany and being away from home. So I think a deployment would have been more taxing on me.
And how long were you there?
I was there from December 2001 to May 2004.
So what assignment came after that?
I ended up at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, where they have it's ICBM base, nuclear weapons. So I worked out in the missile field. I was a flight security controller. So the flight security controller is it's the command center for 10 ICBMs within its area. And then underneath are the missileers. They're in a bunker underneath the control center, about 25 feet below, in a hydraulic environment that's capable of sustaining like a nuclear blast. And they're the ones who have the keys that turn the switch. Yeah, that job was it wasn't too bad. And living in Wyoming, as bad as it may sound, wasn't that bad. It was a small town, about 50,000 people. I did make a lot of friends there, but it was a little stressful for me because, well, I got married in Germany to my first wife, who was a German national. And I had to deal with all the immigration paperwork and procedures that go along with getting my wife to Wyoming. And then I also had shoulder surgery while I was in Wyoming. So I was only there for a year. I actually re-enlisted there, and I got my base of preference, which was McGuire Air Force Base.
So what was McGuire like then?
McGuire was great. It was actually, the base is located in the middle of nowhere. So when everyone thinks of New York, New Jersey, that area, they think that it's probably all cities. It's not. It's rural. It's all farmland. For the most part, it's actually called the Garden State. So McGuire was, it's where I became a Phoenix Raven. So Phoenix Ravens are basically like air marshals for the Air Force. They fly along with Air Force One, with cargo planes, with high rank or very important political figures or military officials on passenger planes to provide protection in countries where the diplomatic standing or the political standing is less than ideal, or countries that are considered dangerous, or countries that have inadequate security for their airfields. We provide protection for the aircraft, and in some instances, the personnel that are on board. We provide like, I don't want to say intel briefs, but we provide like a cultural brief, letting the crew and the passengers know what to avoid when they're away from the airfield, and some safety and security aspects.
Was there any specialized training for that?
Yes, it's a 19-day course, which it's mostly fighting. A lot of anti-terrorism, cross-cultural awareness, learning how to sketch or map out an airfield. Also, mostly fighting and running. I think we ran 7 miles every other day.
Nice.
Probably did about 1,000 push-ups a day, flutter kicks, sit-ups. They had this room called the IHOP. And when I first got there and they said that we have IHOP first thing in the morning, I was like, I'm gonna get pancakes and waffles, and like, this is amazing. We're going to IHOP. And then one of my classmates was like, no, it's International House of Pain. I'm like, no, that's so it's a padded room. The walls are padded, the floors are padded, and it's just an empty room, and they roll out mats, and then they basically harden you as a person. You get punched in the face quite a bit, but it's something you come to appreciate, because I think being able to take a punch is a very marketable and cherishable skill.
Yeah. So did you enjoy that job?
I did. I was able to. I've been to 50 different countries, 5 continents, which spans 30% of the world. So I did that all in the course of 2.5 years. 2.5 years in that job. I was gone as an aircrew member, as a Raven, for 15 days out of the month, usually.
Do you have any memorable experiences?
I remember being broken down, like being on the plane on a C-130 in Bogota, Colombia, on the airfield. It was summertime for them. I don't know if that's the same as ours. They're below the equator, so I think theirs is different. But it was 90 degrees at night, and the mosquitoes were the size of a small bird. And the door was open on the airplane, and I just remember just being eaten by mosquitoes. And that was the first time I ever had to take the malaria, drugs to prevent that. But I remember using my Gore-Tex jacket to cover myself to try to shield off the mosquitoes, and I can hear them trying to penetrate the jacket to get to me. So that was one of my worst experiences. And I remember being stranded on an airplane in Azerbaijan, and it was easily 15 degrees outside. We had no APU running, so there was no heat on the plane. I must have had on I think I went into someone else's suitcase and put on like an extra pair of pants and like 3 pairs of socks, and it was just freezing. And that was a 10-hour shift. Been to Egypt 4 times. Bogota, Colombia, I think we used to go like once every month. Australia. It was a great job. I wouldn't trade it for anything. If I can go back and do that job again, I would.
Was there any combat that you saw during that time, or?
So right in the middle of doing that job, I got stopped on Fort Dix for driving under the influence. I blew a .08. At that point, I was stripped of my special duty, which was the Phoenix Raven job, and I lost my enabler status. Enabler status means that you're in a special duty and you're exempt from being deployed. So I probably would have made it through my entire career without ever deploying. But the moment that I lost my enabler status and I went to court and everything, my commander, first sergeant, supervisor thought it was in my best interest to go into deployment and kind of get away. At the time, I was going through a divorce partly because of my job and being away so much. It kind of started to wear down my marriage. So I ended up going to Camp Bucca, Iraq, which is a prison. Well, not a prison, but a detention center for suspected insurgents in southern Iraq. That was my first and only deployment. It was eye-opening, but I think the whole experience kind of molded me into who I am today. As far as making me more resilient and creating a deterministic mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally, I was not prepared for a deployment. I really just wanted to crawl into a hole and just be alone
Mm-hmm.
and just not deal with anyone or anything. So I'd never been in any legal trouble before.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time, and then my relationship and things just weren't. I just wasn't in a good place.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Iraq. It was about 120 degrees every day. I worked in the special housing unit,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably one of the worst places you can work
Mm-hmm.
in Camp Bucca if you're security forces. There were also Navy people there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, you're dealing with detainees on a personal level
Mm-hmm.
where it's a very intimate setting. I don't want to say intimate, but it's very up close and personal.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a language barrier, communication barrier, a cultural barrier,
Mm-hmm.
and you're stressed out. You don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be there. And you're bringing these two people together in an environment that's just highly hostile.
Mm-hmm.
And being a psychology major, I've done research on things like the Stanford prison experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's human nature that if someone is responsible for another person and they have power over that person,
Mm-hmm.
eventually they're going to abuse that power.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever is the person being abused is eventually going to rebel against that power.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot of the cases in the past that have been tried as far as detainee abuse,
Mm-hmm.
or even in our current prisons, our federal and state prison systems. It's wrapped around a dynamic that's not natural.
Mm-hmm.
It's not natural for humans to be confined, and it's not natural for humans to confine other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Is it necessary? Absolutely, but it's still not a natural dynamic in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the situation that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to deal with things like getting semen and feces and urine
Mm-hmm.
splashed on you or thrown at you, or it was a stressful situation. And then my unit that I was with, we moved away from the special housing unit,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up going to visitation.
Mm-hmm.
So the families of the detainees would come on and they would have, like a normal prison visitation
Mm-hmm.
with whoever their family member is on a weekly basis or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes monthly basis. It was my job. I think I was identified early because I was a Phoenix Raven,
Mm-hmm.
and all the leadership knew that, and they knew that I experienced transporting large groups of detainees from Iraq to Montego Bay,
Mm-hmm.
or not Montego Bay, excuse me, Guantanamo Bay,
Mm-hmm.
not Montego Bay. That's a resort area. That would be kind of awkward. Guantanamo Bay. So I was at one point, or most of the time that I was there, I was the team lead for the detainee escort team.
Mm-hmm.
So we would round up from all the different sections of the detainee camp or prison, whatever you want to call it, and transport them to their visitation, medical, and court appointments.
Mm-hmm.
We would handcuff, search, and transport up to 100 detainees a day.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that in itself was highly stressful, just being in close proximity with people that wanted nothing more than to inflict some type of violence on me.
Mm-hmm.
or anybody on my team. It was something that we did on a daily basis. I think we were lucky if we got one day off a week, which for that one day you're bored. You're like, I'm in the desert. There's nothing to do. There's only so many times a day you can go to the gym. There's only so many times a day you can watch movies on your laptop. So you might as well go back to work. And that's what I did for 8 months. But in that time, I also learned things about myself, and I studied for my test to take so I can get promoted to staff sergeant. Studied about 2 hours a day. And I learned that how to make goals and how to pull myself out of a rut, essentially. And I think that was kind of a turning point for my life.
What'd you do when you got back home?
I bought a car, which was the dumbest thing I could have done. I bought a Mercedes. I got promoted to staff sergeant, and I actually scored pretty high. I started dating my current wife, who I'm going to get divorced from soon. So I met her. I didn't meet her. I met her on MySpace.
MySpace, huh?
I met her on MySpace, but I knew who she was, but she didn't know who I was, because I knew her friend who I met in Turkey. And I saw pictures of her, and her friend told me that she was stationed at McGuire in New Jersey. So then we talked quite a bit while I was deployed, and we went out on a couple of dates when I got back. And then I just went back to work. Eventually, my unit gave me back my enabler status and my special duty. So I went back to flying. I went to Greece, Portugal, Georgia. And a lot of people, when I say Georgia, they always think Georgia.
The States, but... Yeah.
Georgia, the country. Yeah. Tbilisi, Georgia. Russia.
Oh, really?
Ukraine.
Okay.
A couple places like Guam in Asia. I traveled quite a bit in that span, but I ended up getting orders to go to Osan, Korea. So what I did when I first got arrested for my DUI is I put code 88 in my profile, which means that I want a PCS and I don't care where I go, because I just wanted to get away from my unit. When you're security forces and you get arrested or you get a DUI, you get ostracized. Nobody wants to be associated with you. Nobody wants to talk to you. It's it was a very, very uncomfortable for me staying in that unit, so I just wanted to leave. I forgot to change it when I got back from Iraq, and I ended up getting orders to Korea. So I went to, I got back from Iraq in December 2007, and I spent a year back in McGuire, and I got orders to Osan, and I arrived in Osan January 2008. No, I'm sorry, January 2009. January 2009.
What was Korea like?
I don't know. I didn't leave base that much. I went to Seoul a few times. Other than that, I really just stayed on base. Nothing bad to say about the country. It seemed like an economic powerhouse in the world. People were fairly nice. Korean nationals were nice. Kind of fell back into the party and drink thing again, because that's just like, much like Ramstein, it's the culture. But what I did do, I started reading more. So I read a few books while I was out there, which helped keep me a little grounded.
What was your job there?
I was still security forces. I got a job that I applied for as a training instructor.
Mm-hmm.
So I taught various courses like use of force, handcuffing and searching. I taught CPR, a lot of like first responder type courses. I also taught like chemical, biological, CBRNE, like base defense, things like that. We would have exercises every 3 months, once every 3 months, and I would be the. So when we had the exercise, we would have ROK Special Forces, Republic of Korea Special Forces, who would come in, infiltrate the base, and pretty much play the bad guys for the exercise. And my job was to direct them and be their escort, like as we tried to infiltrate the base and attack resources and people. So that was actually pretty fun. My job was pretty easy. I enjoyed it. It helped me develop my public speaking, which helped me as an intel analyst. I taught a fair amount of courses. I actually earned some certifications in the Air Force instructor certification while I was there.
Where you would bring is your wife at the time, or were you guys still dating?
We were still dating. We were engaged. And then we got married in September of 2009. And then I was there until July 2010, and that's when I separated.
So what'd you do? What led to the decision to separate?
I was comfortable enough that I felt like I could make it without having the military as a fallback. I wanted to pursue an education, and even though I liked traveling, I kind of got tired of the moving around. I moved around quite a bit. I don't think I spent more than 3 years in one location. So being married, and I just wanted to start a family, maybe buy a house. And I was comfortable with that decision, and I felt like if I went to the reserves, and I would still get something from all the time that I spent then.
Did you join the reserves at this point? Or?
Yes, I joined the reserves without a break in service. But I ended up going an active ready reserve because I was in school to be a personal trainer. So I was inactive for a year and a half, and then I moved here to Wright-Pat, or to Ohio, and joined the unit at Wright-Pat.
Did you do any college other than the personal training?
Yeah, I was working on my associates in criminal justice, and I ended up finishing that in May 2012.
Okay. And then, so you did a year and a half inactive, and then, so were you with the 88th here at Wright-Pat, or?
I was with
the 88th, 445th?
445th.
Yeah.
I was at the 445th Security Forces, which it's a good unit, but I think that I had a feeling like I was always like the new guy. Like I don't think they really ever incorporated me into their unit. Partly because I applied for a reserve job at headquarters working at anti-terrorism, which I got, and I was there for almost a year. I was in that position. My unit didn't really, the 445th Security Forces, they didn't really give me much responsibility or expect too much from me, just because I think they knew I had a heavy workload at the headquarters. So I think that's why I always felt like I was in limbo with that unit, but it wasn't their fault. It actually helped me. So.
Did you do personal training on the side, or?
Yeah, I was working. So after working at the headquarters, I got a job with LA Fitness as a personal trainer director. At one point, I was one of, if not the highest grossing in personal training sales for Dayton, Cincinnati, and Northern Kentucky.
Really?
But that was like for a span of like I think a month or two. But then they quickly died down. And it wasn't bad. I did personal training. I was a master trainer at one of the gyms, and I was also a training director, which I just prefer to be a personal trainer, just training people, not selling personal training packages.
What made you want to do personal training?
Just always being athletic and being into fitness, and it's a conduit for me to help people achieve their goals. So I've always been a person who's been concerned about other people, or I've always had this worldview that, and some people would probably call it a liberal worldview, but it's to try to put others before myself. But personal training was something that I enjoyed, and I also feel I can get a lot of job satisfaction from by helping other people.
So how long were you at the 445th?
I was there for about a year and a half. About a year and a half, and I quickly realized that I wanted to try to pursue something else, which I tried OSI. But that fell through, and then Intel seemed like a viable option.
Why Intel?
Going back to what I said at the beginning, it's just being African American, you kind of have this drive that you need to up your standing or do something to, not just for society, but for yourself. Because growing up in the 1980s and the 1990s, it was a period of time where stereotypes just were what they were, and no one questioned them, and no one did anything to try to extinguish them. They were accepted ideologies about certain groups of people. So as African Americans, we internalize negative stereotypes about ourselves. It's hard not to. So attending both black and white schools, predominantly black and white schools, I grew up with the stereotype that I'm exceptionally athletic, but intellectually I'm inferior. So Intel was kind of a way for me to not just show other people, but just to prove to myself that I could do it, that I'm capable. So even though I didn't have the ASVAB score, because when I took my ASVAB test initially, I was in junior high school, and I didn't take it too serious. I kind of just like blew through it because the Army guys came to the school and administered the test, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I took it anyways. It was a 3-hour-long test. I got decent scores, but I didn't really try. So I had to study to take the Intel test to qualify for this job. I scored pretty well, and then I was starting to look at the mechanical scores and the electrician scores, and I was like, maybe I want to be an engineer. But I stuck with Intel, and I'm grateful for it, for that decision.
So what year did you cross-train in order to?
It was, so I joined a unit. I joined the 14th Intel Squadron in December 2013. And I didn't go to tech school until November of that following year. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to remember when I got there.
Yeah.
Because I think you were gone when I got there, or maybe.
You had just got there right before I left.
So tell me about tech school for Intel.
It was, I don't do well in training environments. I'm a very slow learner, and it's a process for me. But it was, I was an E6, I was a tech sergeant. So I wasn't the class leader, but I was, one of the highest ranking people in the class. And you have all these kids that are fresh out of high school, and I'm just looking around like, these kids are way smarter than me when I was 18 years old. Like, these kids are brilliant. Like, they know all this stuff, and I'm barely keeping up the class myself. So it was a hard situation where I was expected to be head and shoulders above everyone else in the class to some extent, and I wasn't. So then it kind of diminished the level of influence and power that I had in the class, if that makes sense. But I still maintained, and I mean, my briefings were good. I didn't fail any tests, but I just wasn't. I mean, these kids in the class were smart. So it was just hard for me to tell them what to do when they knew more than me at times. I was also taking 3 classes while I was in Intel school towards my bachelor's. So that was hard. Studying for my Intel test and also taking classes online. And I had a girlfriend in Dallas who I saw every weekend. So that was a 4-hour drive there and a 4-hour drive back to San Angelo. Yeah.
So tell me about, as much as you can, and the 14th. What's your thoughts and opinions on that?
Oh, no, 14th?
Yeah.
It was like a family for me. It was at a time they wouldn't know it, but they provided me a lot of support at a time when I was really at my worst. Right before I joined the 14th, I was going through a really bad marriage breakup. And we ended up separating, and I was essentially living out of my car for about 4 months. Working 3 jobs, including the reserve job. I was getting about 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I was taking classes full time. There was one time where I had to type a college paper on my cell phone in Starbucks for the internet connection. And then I emailed the paper to myself. And then when I finally got to a computer, I edited it. And it was like a 6-page paper. So that was, I had to do the research and type it all on my cell phone. And it was due like within 2 days. There were times when I ate loaves of bread because that's all I could afford. But being in the 14th and having that camaraderie and having that source of a goal, like my commitment to the 14th is what drove me to finish in tech school. And that's what kind of got me through probably one of the hardest times of my life. So I'm grateful for that experience.
Let's see here. So you've been in the 14th now for 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well, it would have been 4 years, but I switched units.
And so I knew you were pursuing a few different things. What would you ended up pursuing?
As far as my education or career?
Well, yeah, that's actually talk about your education. Psychology is what?
Yeah, so I have an associate's in criminal justice. My bachelor's is a triple major in psychology, sociology, and criminal justice. And I'm in the middle of a master's degree in public health with a focus in nutrition. And I was pursuing a second bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, which I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with that.
It's a lot of education.
It's a lot of education. When you have children, in some cases, you feel like you always have to have a backup plan to your backup plan to provide for them. My father wasn't really around for me. So it was really just me and my mother and my siblings. The only thing that I ever really wanted to be was a father. So I was told by a doctor that I actually couldn't have kids. So the fact that they're here is miraculous. So that's something that I don't take for granted. So I try hard to give them the life that I didn't have.
And why choose those degrees?
I had already had experience in criminal justice, and I had the credits from the military, so it just seemed the easiest route to just to get a bachelor's degree to complement my military service. Psychology just because it just seemed interesting. Sociology because I feel like I'm good at understanding social aspects that are surrounded around that degree. Public health, nutrition, nutrition and fitness is something that I've always been interested in. Cybersecurity, just because I felt like that's a good field to go into for job security.
Definitely in this day and age.
Yeah, earning potential. So it just made sense.
So you were pursuing a few options. Tell me, because I know this part probably is a little tricky. Tell me what after the 14th.
I left the 14th, not necessarily because of a bad experience, but I just felt like it was time to move on. I had done everything that I wanted to do in the unit. I had been there since the beginning, and it was starting to become kind of unfamiliar. There were people that I had become accustomed to that were leaving, and there were new people coming in that I didn't have any problems with, but it was just to a point where I just felt like it was just time to go and start somewhere else. And also, it got to a point where I felt like I wasn't doing my intel job, and I was doing more of an administrative job, like I was a personnelist. And I switched my unit to Ramstein, which would have put me in a position where I was supporting AFRICOM, and that would have put me primarily in an intel position and not like a supervisory position. And that's essentially what I wanted.
And that's where you were stationed before, right?
That's where I was stationed before, so it gave me an opportunity to go back to Germany. Yeah.
Okay. So your plans, I think, got a little derailed. Is that something you want to talk about now, or is?
Yeah. So back in October, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. I have a tumor the size of a grapefruit in my colon, the lower distal part of my colon. I've been going through chemo since then. I actually have chemo scheduled for 5 days from now. My prognosis, according to my oncologist, is a 7% chance of survival and life expectancy of 2 years. So that's it's been a punch in the mouth, to say the least. You make all these plans and you think you do everything right, and you end up with a life-threatening disease. And it's at one point I was asking why me, and I'm an atheist now, so I don't necessarily subscribe to a particular religion or deity, but it's just I was trying to find some type of guidance or answer for why, and then I started to think, why not me? You know, there are kids who develop cancer and they didn't do anything to deserve it. So why should I think that I was deserving of developing cancer? It's been a long road, but I fought my way back. At one point, I was 125 pounds. I think I lost 65 pounds in the matter of 2 months. I was on the verge of dying, actually, when I finally had surgery to have a colonoscopy or colostomy stoma installed, so I can maintain some type of functionality with my digestive system. it's not always the disease that kills people. I feel like it's the mindset that if you have a fatalistic mindset that you're going to succumb to your cancer, then you will. You have to find a why, and for me, my why is my children. So I go to the gym every day. I try not to stress about things because I believe stress is a huge contributor to developing cancer. I think it weakens the immune system and the body's ability to turn off cancer cells. I changed my diet significantly, changed my lifestyle overall. So I don't know how long I have, but I made a pact with God, and I don't know if there is a God, but I said that if I survive, then I'll dedicate my life to helping people who have cancer, whether it be with the resources, with my time and efforts, or collecting donations, or just communicating to people about the importance of prevention, or how to get through the chemo, how to get through radiation, maybe being a motivational speaker. I think that the current healthcare system doesn't really accommodate cancer prevention or cancer patients. I think it's more of if you have cancer, then we'll find it and we'll cut it out if we can. If we can't, then we'll treat you with radiation and chemo. But those are treatments that have been around for almost a millennia. It's nothing different than what we did 50, 60, 70 years ago. I think that there has to be a new approach to cancer treatment. It's kind of hard because once somebody is diagnosed with cancer, you can't monitor that person and see the progression of a cancer or see if unconventional methods, and when I say unconventional methods, I mean anything outside of chemo or radiation would work. It's almost like as soon as they're diagnosed with cancer, they immediately go to conventional because that has provided the best success thus far. But it's the only thing that we have. I think that insurance companies and hospitals have to be more mindful of cancer development at early ages and start to monitor people at early ages. Things like breast cancer. Colon cancer is something that usually happens at age 50, whereas people in their 30s or 40s are starting to develop colon cancer more often. Prostate cancer, we don't detect for that until age 40, but it's also something maybe we should start looking at age 20, age 25, 30. And then we have to start observing the potential causes of cancer. I mean, we know the basics like melanoma, asbestos, or the obvious ones that are environmentally, lung cancer, say, tobacco. But there are certain ones we have to start examining how colon cancer can be caused by a Western diet. It's something that we ignore because it's too big to change. Who's going to go into a grocery store and not buy the stuff that tastes good? And it's an addiction that we accept and we never really address. When we think of addiction, we think of synthetic drugs. But I would argue that sugar, processed sugar, is probably the most prevalent addiction in the United States. And probably one of the biggest contributors to colon cancer.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, because I remember seeing you a couple months ago, and you didn't look so well. And then I think we talked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's you getting your commendation medal, and you look amazing.
Yeah.
I saw you just outside the lockers, like, wow, like, bigger than I am, and then what you basically just reiterated what you said during your um, receiving the medal. But that's truly an inspiring story, and just your change in mindset. I think I also noticed your Facebook was you had like Muhammad Ali or something like that,
Yeah.
and it said "fuck cancer," and like, yeah, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
I love that mindset that you have, because given what doctors tell you, just knowing the prognosis, like that's a scary thing, and like you said, stress can be the ultimate downfall for that. But you've kind of turned it against cancer, and again, like I said, look at you right now. You look amazing. So I wish you the best for the future treatment, and definitely hope to see you around. What message would you like to leave for future generations that might be viewing this interview?
To be more tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say tolerant, I don't mean in terms of ethnicity or culturally or politically.
Mm-hmm.
It's more tolerant, or to have a value for lives of other people, even if they're strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer is not something that I was fully aware of before, even though I was a public health major. But 1 in 3 people in the United States will develop cancer in their lifetime. And that number is growing dramatically. And hundreds of thousands of people this year will die from cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Those are mothers and fathers, grandparents, children. So we have to pay attention to the public health crisis that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't just stop at cancer. It's really any disease that's life threatening or debilitating.
Mm-hmm.
We have to start identifying the root causes and work to prevent them, and be a crutch for other people and a support system for other people,
Mm-hmm.
not just the people that are in our circle.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of people out there who are alone, who need help.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never done anything. I would have never said anything until it actually happened to me, and then now it becomes a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way to be an American. It's fine to be an individual, but no man is an island.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start thinking about these issues as a collective, and write our congressmen,
Mm-hmm.
or sign a petition,
Mm-hmm.
or be an activist
Mm-hmm.
for change. Some people are going bankrupt because they can't afford to pay their bills, because their medication costs more than they can afford, or they can't pay their insurance premiums.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Mm-hmm.
just be more tolerant, be more understanding of other people's situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. What's the future for Dorian White?
Hopefully a long one. Hopefully a long, prosperous future that I can enjoy with my children,
Mm-hmm.
and my future wife, my girlfriend. But I plan to be an activist
Mm-hmm.
for people struggling, not just with disease, but just with the ability to I don't want to say go against a system, but just to operate within a system which is adversarial to their success.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to work to pass more laws that accommodate people with life-threatening diseases.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to, prevent people from going bankrupt just because they can't pay their hospital bills.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably my future. I'll probably retire here soon,
Mm-hmm.
and focus on my health, or take a hiatus off from work. and try to extend my life as long as I can, and just focus on my children.
Awesome. Was there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
Nope. I think I said everything.
Well, Dorian, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming here. First of all, thank you for your service, and then thank you, most importantly, for your message. So, appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That concludes the interview of Dorian White.